At the end of every transaction, sometimes customers are happy and sometimes customers are sad. This week on Talking Real, we tell you how to keep those happy clients for life and how to handle those upset clients when things don't go quite right.
When dealing with clients, good vibes only.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 108 of Talking Real, and you're in the studio with Jeff and Nabil. Nabil, how's your day going?
Fantabulous.
Hey, happy Fat Tuesday.
Happy Fat Tuesday.
Mardi Gras is
here.
is wrapping up on Fat Tuesday when this episode's coming out, and so yeah, laissez le bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll.
Nice.
My French isn't great, but that's close enough.
Don't forget the King's Cake.
Yes.
Is that what it is? King's Cake, right?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. And if you get the baby, then you got to buy the King's Cake next year.
That's right.
So it is that's going on right now.
Who got the King's Cake here?
I don't remember. I think somebody forgot to put the baby in the cake, so nobody actually got it. But hope everyone's having a wonderful week out there. We've got an interesting episode for you today.
I think this was cool because we were looking for, we're always scouring for content.
Yes, it's a nonstop thing. We're always looking for content.
And we came across this quiz.
Yeah.
That talked about, that tested you on keeping customers for life.
Yeah.
And we thought that would be a good topic to kind of dive into, not necessarily as a question and answer, but it brought up some good points.
Yeah.
Like there's some things that you would think, oh, maybe that makes sense. Maybe, so we figured we'd talk about those.
For sure. So a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about is sort of after the transaction is done in a lot of ways, or at the end of the transaction, doing things to make sure those clients are coming back, making referrals. But also we're going to talk a little bit about kind of managing conflict with clients and just what are you doing? Do you have a policy? Those kinds of things to talk about how to handle conflicts with clients and complaints and those kinds of things. Because not everything always ends happy, and sometimes you got an upset client. And so,
right. And it could be in the middle of the transaction. It could be right at the end, and that's the number one way to lose a client.
Absolutely. And, I think that it bears more than just having happy clients, because I will tell you from my experience dealing with professional standards, we have a lot of cases that come through, a lot of complaints that come through from somebody who is a disgruntled client or customer, that they are filing a complaint against their realtor or their broker because they are upset with something. And on top of that, you will occasionally see, even beyond just like an ethics complaint, you'll see a real estate commission complaint filed if somebody's upset. And you'll also see at times even litigation, right? You may get sued because of an unhappy client. And so there's a lot of risk.
The scale of unhappiness.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of risk there associated with having unhappy clients. And so we want to make sure that we're putting forth some information to let you guys think about what do you need to be doing to handle those so that you can kind of de-escalate and hopefully resolve those before they get to the point of somebody filing a complaint with us or OREC or filing a lawsuit in a worst case scenario.
And apart from the professional standards and maybe the litigation that might follow from an unhappy client, there's also the part where it damages your reputation.
Absolutely.
Right? So if they're mad enough to lodge a complaint, they're definitely mad enough to talk to other people about it.
For sure.
So, your good word isn't spreading. So I think that harms you as a business person as well.
Absolutely. Recently I actually saw a case where they filed their complaint with the real estate commission, and then they also went on Facebook and Google and left negative reviews for that person. And so they were like airing it all out. They were, leaving those negative reviews. So when somebody shows up, they see that 1-star review and somebody complaining. So anything you can do to try to alleviate that, because you can't control everything. You're not going to be able to control every transaction, and maybe unfairly a client or customer is unhappy with you, but that doesn't mean that it's not in your best interest to figure out a way to resolve it.
And that happens.
Absolutely.
And if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will happen.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. But let's start with talking about some of the things that you can do to keep those happy clients and keep them coming back.
And staying on top of their mind.
Absolutely.
And get those referrals.
Yeah. So the first kind of issue is talking about when you should give a closing gift. Is this something that you should give at closing or really close to closing, or would it be better to actually wait a couple of weeks after the fact? So you had your closing and then a couple weeks later, maybe 4 weeks later even, you come back and that's when you give your closing
Because you're
gift.
thinking maybe like things are busy, they're moving in. You don't want to like intrude and cause a hindrance.
Right. Or you think that maybe that gives you an opportunity to have an extra touch point after closing that like, we'll wait to give them the closing gift. So yeah, what do you think?
I think you should give it soon, but not wait too long. So
Right.
I wouldn't say wait like several weeks.
Yeah.
I would say maybe wait a week.
Yeah.
Like they've got the main moving in done, and as soon as they're getting settled, boom,
Yeah.
you get a closing gift. Be like, oh, that was nice.
Yeah. Well, what this recommends is that you actually give your closing gift very soon after closing, if not just immediately after. It also says, though, that you then take other opportunities to follow. So give that closing gift at closing, right after, the next day, whatever it is, within a day or two. But also says within a day or two of them moving into their home, give them a call, see how their move-in is going, see if there's anything that they need. Hey, do you have any plumbing issues or something like that? Maybe some sort of service that they're needing, and say, hey, do you have any recommendations for a plumber, right? I mean, maybe that will happen, and it'll give you an opportunity to continue being that expert for them that they can go to. Or, there's any number of things that may come up. Or, hey, it turns out we opened a cabinet and found that they left a bunch of stuff. Do you think you could call the other realtor and maybe you could then offer to go pick up that box and make that delivery, take something off their hands that they wouldn't have to deal with. And again, just show that you'll go above and beyond. Even after you've earned that paycheck, you're still there to be an expert for them.
And a resource for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So don't use the closing gift as your one touch point.
Yes.
Use it as kind of like a launching pad for several touch points.
Exactly. And it is a closing gift, so keep it close to closing.
Yes.
There you go.
The next thing this brought up, and I think you kind of touched upon this, was, if they ask you for referrals and plumbers and things like that, is there some sort of liability with providing that information? Like, say you recommended someone and they didn't do a good job or they screwed something else up. Can that blow back on you in terms of, you recommended me that person, you're the professional, I did this because you said so? Any blowback?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic because the answer sort of, it depends, right? It can and maybe it won't, depending on how you do it. I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And if you are making the decision for your client, they say we need a home inspector, and you just say this is who we're using, or you only recommend one person, that can really be problematic. And there's been cases, we've seen cases kind of all over the country where that very kind of thing happened. They recommended, a particular home inspector. That home inspector missed something big. Next thing you know, they're suing everybody. They're suing their realtor because that's who recommended it. They're suing the home inspector. They're suing the seller. They're just suing everybody. And sure, you can sue anybody for any reason. But even in some of those cases, there has been some liability for the realtor that made that suggestion of just like, you should use this person. So the better way to do it, to avoid the liability issues, is to have a list of multiple vendors that are available. So there's nothing wrong with having a list to say, here's a list of 5 home inspectors in the area, and here's a list of 5 plumbers in the area. 5 roofers,
or even if it was just 2,
something
as
more
long
than,
as you give an option.
Absolutely, and you're giving the ultimate call to your client, your customer. Let them make the call and saying, look, these are all people that you could, having a handful of options. These are the people that you could contact for this. That's perfectly fine. That would be an acceptable thing to do. Nothing wrong with that. And I think in that circumstance, that's going to help you avoid that liability to say, look, I just gave them some options, and maybe even that caveat that there could be other ones outside of this, but these are just some that I'm familiar with. that you might consider giving a call to or that we can schedule with, right? And then in that circumstance, you've kind of done your part to say, I'm being an expert and a resource by providing some options, but I'm not making the decision for them. And I'm not also just shepherding them to like one particular person that could then backfire and get me in trouble.
Right.
And I think that, this goes with anything. I mean, there's a little bit of risk when you're kind of guiding somebody. I've seen people that have arrangements with particular lenders or title companies or those kinds of things. And if you're not having that conversation with your client to say, hey, here's some options, but you can go with whoever you want. This is just one option. You open the door for liability, right? It's not guaranteed that you're going to get sued or anything like that, but you got to think through how you're going to make that suggestion to them of these are the options, some of the options that you have available to you. And just be careful with that, because when things go south, they're going to look at you and say, you recommended this person, and then you're going to be stuck in that situation. So just be careful with it.
They're going to look for anything to rectify the situation.
Absolutely.
So, and you'll be right there.
Absolutely. So if you're going to do that, do it the right way. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Just make sure you're doing it the right way.
So going back to the touch points, we talked about give your closing gift close to closing and use it as a launch pad for more touch points throughout the year. Now, how many touch points is too many? Because, a lot of times people might think, oh, I don't want to bother them too much, and people are busy. I don't want to follow up with them too much and take up their time. I don't want them to think I'm annoying. The question comes up with, do you just talk to them once a year, or should you do something more often?
Yeah, and this says that really that kind of the sweet spot would be follow up with referrals and past clients at least every 60 days. So every couple of months would be kind of an ideal touch point, so that you're not spamming them. So every week they're getting an email from you like, oh my gosh, and that's going to potentially drive that unsubscribe rate.
Right.
But once a year, I mean, there's a lot of time in between.
I think that's just too infrequent.
Right. So, there's probably a lot of different options that are really good, but the key here is that people's memories are pretty short and people are busy. They've got a lot of things going on. And so you do want to make sure that you're contacting them frequently enough that when somebody says, man, I need to sell my house, anybody? They're going to think of you first and pop off that referral right there, versus not being too frequent to where it's annoying or disruptive. Or
don't show up at their doorstep or call them and have an hour-long conversation with them. Drop a little note.
Right.
Say hi. Be like,
absolutely.
Anything I can help you with. Things going well. Fantastic.
Right.
Done.
And actually, if you go back to one or maybe both of our episodes with Brad Reeser that we did recently, and he talked about kind of this, so that particularly when things are a little bit slower, right? And you're like, oh, I don't have any transactions going on right now. Well, that's a perfect time to use that to reach out to past clients just to say, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
So go back and listen to one of those because he's got some good feedback on that too.
Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah. We did talk a minute ago about closing gifts, and here's just sort of like an interesting little tidbit of information that
fun fact
a little factoid that people kind of forget about. And the question is, what about deducting that for your IRS income tax purposes? And this is just sort of a little, make sure you're thinking about this as you're going forward. But the question is, how much can you deduct of a closing gift? And
as much as you want.
That would make sense in a lot of ways, right? But the IRS actually has a very, very restrictive rule on this. And this is sort of more broadly of just business-related gifts.
It is surprisingly small.
Yeah, that it's only $50 per couple or $25 per individual. So if you've got a husband and wife closing on a property and you get them a closing gift, only $50 of that would be deductible.
So if they had kids, if the husband and wife had 4 kids, you could deduct $150.
I don't know that that's correct. I think that it is. Well, you know what? You're going to need to talk to your accountant about that, because I don't know for certain, but it may only be 2 adults in the household. So I'm not certain on that, but it is limited to $25 per person. And again, you got a question: are you giving it to the kids or not, or is that
that's really small?
It is. It's very small. So just be thinking about that you need to have that conversation with your accountant. now that we're here in tax time, since taxes are coming up here in a month and a half or so.
Right. Yeah. I have some friends doing those right now, and I'm like, kind of early.
Right. I mean, I had to do that old extension last year because I just didn't get it done in time.
So talking about touch points, because you gave your $50 closing gift and deducted all of it. I mean, you could give more, but you just can't deduct it.
Right.
You send out a newsletter, whether it's email, whether you snail mail it, whatever your preference is, hand deliver it, whatever you want to do. What information should you include in that? And they talked about, is it appropriate to include information about yourself and your achievements? Like, should you brag in your newsletter, right? Yeah. And I would say yes.
Yeah.
Because they need to know how good you are.
Absolutely. To me, there's nothing. I mean, it's a business, and people want to know that the person they're working with is reputable, and maybe they've got the education and training. So
you've been doing good things, maybe like helping out the community, whatever it is.
Yeah, we got a lot of people who do some good stuff in the community. Personalize yourself and also brag about your accomplishments. So, maybe you've got a designation. Maybe you've gone and done your GRI and you've got that GRI designation or CRS or whatever the case is. Include that information. Tell your customers through some sort of a newsletter, if you're sending out emails, whatever it is, hey, I've got this designation and here's what it means for you. Here's why it creates value for you. And I think that's a really smart thing to do. You went through all that time and effort and money to get those credentials, to do all these great things, to help out in the community. Tell your clients about it, because one, that just helps create that connection between you and your customers. So don't be afraid. It's sometimes going to be weird. It's right. Like if you're going to go do like a speaking thing and like, hey, can you send me a bio? And you have to like write your own bio.
It is weird. It feels
it's a weird thing to do, to do that. But maybe get some help from somebody in the office. Say, hey, I gotta do this thing, or I'm trying to do this newsletter. Can you help me write this in a way, right? Get somebody else to come in and give you some feedback, and maybe that'll help you feel comfortable with writing about yourself. But yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like if you helped organize a cleanup for the neighborhood park and maybe that person visits that park often, now they'll never forget you. They'll be like, oh, that's the person who did that. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
That's super cool. Very important to include all that information.
For sure. And when you're sending out this information, we talked about the consistency where you got to have that touch point every 60 days or so, right?
Let's say every quarter.
Assume every quarter, once a quarter, you're reaching out. But the question is, should you send the same piece several times in a row to make sure that they get it or whatever the case is? And I think the answer here is no, right? Like you want to be consistent, but if somebody notices that they're getting the same thing over and over, that all of a sudden starts to feel really impersonal.
Yep.
And
it loses value.
It does.
They're not going to look at it. It makes no difference.
And they're going to question whether it was a mistake. Like, why did they send the same thing twice? Yeah. Did they pay attention? So don't just recycle those marketing pieces to the same customers over and over. Change it up, do different style, send a newsletter, send a handwritten note, send a postcard, send an email, just switch it up a little bit. Make sure you're having different content in those so that it doesn't seem stale or just overly manufactured.
Yeah, or old.
Yeah.
Right, maybe you did this park cleanup 5 years ago. You can't keep harping on that.
Right.
Right. You've probably done something else in the past 5 years that you could talk about.
Absolutely.
And while you're switching things up, it is also important to maintain your brand. So, make sure your branding, which is your colors and your logo and your graphical elements, they're all cohesive. So like each material looks like it came from you rather than it's coming from different sources.
That's a good point. Yeah. Keeps that, like you said, that cohesive brand awareness that people associate with it. I like that. That's good stuff.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So kind of the last thing on having these happy clients is, how do you solicit that feedback from somebody? What are you asking them to do in terms of a review? Like, should it be at least a 4-page review that you're sending to them, a survey? I get these from my doctor's office every time I show up, and it's like 40 questions of
who fills that out.
I've done it once, and I'm like, I don't want to fill it out again. Like, I like my doctor. It's fine. Yeah, I did. So the question is that something that you should know, right? Like it's got to be simple to do. People are busy. More and more, I start to see where somebody does send like a customer satisfaction survey, and it's literally like 2 questions.
Yeah,
and like one of them is optional. So you have to think about what are you doing to solicit that feedback. Make it easy on people. If it's, hey, will you go to Google and leave a review? Like give them the link. Tell them how to do that. Like make it as simple as possible. Yeah. If you want to have a testimonial for your website, say, hey, can you just send me a quick little blurb that I can throw up on my website as a testimonial? Or will you click here and give me a rating or a recommendation on Facebook? Whatever it is, like keep it simple. Don't ask them to do too many things because then they won't do any. So just,
true.
Yeah. So you got to kind of pick and choose and be very careful about how you do that. It's a good thing to do, I think. I think soliciting that feedback is very good. But it's got to be simple, quick, and just very user-friendly for them.
One, it's good to, like you're saying, get those reviews and testimonials, but it's also important for you to know how you're doing. You might have thought that you did this thing fantastic, but coming from the other side, they're like, well, it wasn't that great. So you could maybe improve on that and get better. So definitely a small survey. At our broker summit last year in December, there was, I forget her name, but she was talking about emojis. And she was talking about how surveys, they're simple surveys with just emojis.
Huh.
And so it's either like a smiling face or a sad face. And it was just one question. It's like, how do we do today, right? And you just click a face and that's it.
That's great.
So, surveys are getting that small.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's helpful, right? That's something that you can do to, again, it's a touch point. And hopefully solicits positive feedback. And if it doesn't, then you know where you stand.
Right. And that gives you an opportunity to follow up.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, I noticed you said I didn't do a good job. Why didn't I do a good job?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So you can kind of clean up the mess, which leads us
improve.
into kind of our last piece, which is sort of how do you deal with angry clients or upset clients? Because again, when we started this, we talked about that having an upset client doesn't just mean that, oh, well, that one client isn't happy with me. It could mean that they're leaving negative reviews. It could, in those worst case scenarios, they're filing a professional standards ethics complaint. They're filing a complaint with the real estate commission. They're hiring a lawyer and filing a lawsuit, And so the thing is that we see kind of firsthand in some of our professional standards cases is I've seen too many cases of people that kind of dig in when they've got an upset client because they're convinced that they were right. That, my client is just, they're in the wrong here. They're mad for the wrong reason and I'm right and all this, but it still then leads down a path where you're still having to deal with this complaint that was filed. You're still having to deal with coming to an ethics hearing or whatever the case is. And I think people need to be thinking about, brokers in particular, think about, how are we handling complaints and upset clients? Particularly like the larger your brokerage, the harder this is to deal with, because if you've got 150 agents underneath you, what's your policy in your office on dealing with these complaints? How are you dealing with that? And
I think one of the most important things before we jump into this is addressing them quickly.
Absolutely.
Like, don't let it sit.
Yeah.
You get something bad. You might need to think about it for a little bit, but don't let it sit for days or weeks. The quicker you respond, the less it intensifies.
Right. Right. And so that first step, like you said, reach out quickly to them. Make sure that they understand that you're hearing their complaint and you're trying to address it. You have to also think through how you're talking to them. If they're upset and getting escalated and getting emotional, responding in like fashion is only going to make things worse, right? And the next thing you know, people are yelling and saying something that they really shouldn't. But so you got to be a little bit almost detached a little bit, right? You got to stay calm. You got to talk to them, figure out
someone else type the email.
Yeah, exactly. Get the facts, right? Try to understand what happened that has led them to be upset. You may think you know everything, but make sure you fully understand exactly what the facts are before you try to address it. And then try to ask them for the solution. What can we do? What would make you whole? What would make you happy about this?
Right.
Now, maybe you can't do what it is they're asking for, or you don't want to, or whatever, but figure out what it is that would make them happy, what would make them whole, make them feel better, and make them not go to that next step and file a lawsuit, right? And then from there, you can give your options and say, well, okay, I understand you want that, but like maybe would this work instead or whatever. You can have that negotiation, but show that you're trying to make it right. And sometimes that's a monetary issue of you got to pay a little bit of money to settle a claim, right? It happens. You got an upset client. They want some money. And maybe that's the best way to handle it is like, you know what, if I have to like settle this claim and it's going to cost me a little bit, it could cost you a lot more by not doing it. So you got to kind of weigh that decision, consider consulting your own legal counsel, those kinds of things if that comes up. But that's something that you really need to do is to really consider, like, is this worth taking care of this issue right now, make them whole, or try to, but offering that solution up and figuring out what you can do to alleviate the next steps that they may be willing to go to. Because we do see it quite frequently. Oftentimes it's not somebody who's upset and they just go away. Right. They yell and scream and then they just go away. Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of people, they're going to go and they're going to file that complaint and they're going to create a real headache for you. We actually have a sample policy that we got out of basically a broker's handbook that came from NAR that deals with this. And they actually recommend, particularly for, I think, larger brokerages, to have somebody that is like designated in your office as the person for complaints. So if somebody gets a complaint, your agents are understanding like they need to loop in this person to help with those complaints, because having that third party person that's part of your company who's not necessarily involved in the transaction can also be a good strategy to say, and that may be you as the broker or somebody else who's, you know, been around for a long time, whatever the case is, you've got somebody who can help that's sort of a neutral.
Look at it objectively.
Exactly.
Right.
That can step in, that has a good demeanor, that talks well with people, that's going to be able to deal with an upset person and not get upset themselves and try to help resolve that issue. And I think that's a really good strategy to have somebody who's got that background that can really kind of step in and help navigate some of these issues. And what we'll even do is, if you want to see a copy of this policy, you can send us an email to podcast@okrealtors.com and we'll send you a copy of it. So you can kind of see what came out of this handbook. We'll send you a copy because you might want to consider having some sort of policy in your office on what do we do when we have an upset client? How are we handling that? Who are we referring that to? Those kinds of things, so that you can help navigate these so they don't get out of control.
Right. I think that's important. Have a plan of action.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's a good risk management tool. So... Well, Nabil, I think we have made it to the end of this episode of Talking Real.
Sounds like it.
Well, we do want to offer a quick reminder. Don't forget that we had our first legislative update last week that we've brought to you now that legislative session has kicked off. As we discussed, we're going to maybe be bringing some special episodes that aren't our regular episodes throughout legislative session to give you updates. So be on the lookout for that, maybe the end of this week and the next week as things progress.
For the special Friday episodes.
Yes. And sign up for Capital Conference. You still got some time. That's coming up ASAP.
Yeah, just in a week.
Yeah. So, let us know if you want to come join us on that. So head on over to okrealtors.com/Capital Conference and get your last minute sign up in.
Yep. And while you're there, you can also check out Region 9 Conference.
Absolutely.
And check out all the good, cool speakers we've got coming, and everyone from our adjoining states, Kansas, Arkansas, and Missouri. All 4 states are going to come together. NAR Region 9, like the number 9.com. Check it out.
For sure. So thanks for joining us every week here on Talking Real. We appreciate you so much. And thanks for coming back every single week.
That's right. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a rating, write us a review. That helps a lot and helps us get out in front of more people.
Absolutely. So until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.